The city's streets were still draped in the soft glow of the early morning sun, a quiet calm before the daily rush. Johnny Depp, having just wrapped up a charity event, walked through the streets of downtown. His life, filled with the whirlwind of fame and the complexities of his personal journey, had always been in the public eye. But today he needed a break, time for himself to reflect, away from the noise of Hollywood. His hands were shoved in his pockets, his gaze wandering. He wasn't focused on the world around him. Instead, his thoughts wandered to his own struggles, his own pain. Sometimes life is just a reflection of what we've been through, he thought. It was a truth he'd learned through years of hardship. He paused on the sidewalk, inhaling the cool morning air. His eyes fell on something, or rather someone. An old man sitting hunched on a weathered bench, his body frail and crippled. The man's hands were tightly wrapped around a tattered coat, and a worn wheelchair sat next to him. Despite the early morning chill, the man seemed isolated, unnoticed by the hurried pedestrians around him. But Johnny, with his sharp eyes and deep empathy, couldn't look away. There was a moment of recognition. The pain in that man's eyes was familiar, something Johnny had seen in the mirror during his own darkest moments. Something about him reminded Johnny of the struggles he had endured and the battles he had fought. Taking a deep breath, Johnny stepped closer, knowing this was the moment that would define the rest of his day. Johnny stopped just a few feet from the old man, who barely noticed him at first. As Johnny slowly approached, he asked, "Hey, how are you doing today?" The old man looked up with confusion, his eyes flickering with wariness. He wasn't used to being spoken to, let alone by someone who didn't pass him by. Johnny smiled softly, his face full of kindness and understanding, and waited for the old man's response. "I'm surviving," the old man muttered, his voice raw, as if each word took everything out of him. The tremble in his hands was apparent as he tried to adjust the blanket wrapped around his legs, which were crippled from an accident years ago. Johnny could feel the old man's pain, not just from his physical condition, but the emotional weight of a life filled with hardships. "I know what it's like," Johnny thought, remembering his own struggles. "I know how it feels to be invisible." Sitting beside him on the cold bench, Johnny shared his own thoughts. "I understand. Life's tough, but that doesn't mean you have to go through it alone." The old man's eyes flickered with disbelief, his lips curving into a bitter smile. "You wouldn't understand. People don't care. I've been out here too long. No one looks at me." Johnny nodded, his heart aching for the man. "I've been there," Johnny thought. "I know what it feels like when no one sees you." He took a deep breath and then spoke with a quiet certainty. "I've been to places in my life where I felt invisible too. But even in those moments, I realize there's always someone who sees us. You're not invisible to me." The man's eyes welled up. He didn't know how to respond to such words. No one had ever said that to him, let alone someone like Johnny Depp. But something about Johnny's words touched him deeply. For the first time, he felt as though someone truly understood. The two men sat in silence for a while, the city's noise and cold air seemingly distant. Johnny could see that this moment had sparked something inside the old man, a flicker of hope. Johnny reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small bundle of cash. As he handed it over, he said softly, "This isn't just money. It's a reminder that someone cares." The old man's eyes widened, his breath catching. Johnny wasn't done yet. He pulled out his phone and quickly ordered a hot meal to be delivered right there. Knowing the warmth would mean more than just food, it would be a moment of dignity, a moment of peace in the chaos. When the food arrived, Johnny placed it in front of the old man. As the warm meal was placed into the man's hands, Johnny said, "I'm not just giving you food. I'm giving you something more, a moment of peace, a bit of warmth for your heart." Tears welled up in the old man's eyes. He had lived a life filled with rejection, abandonment, and endless struggle. But here, in this fleeting moment, he was reminded that humanity was still alive. Johnny Depp, someone he'd only seen on TV and movies, had given him the greatest gift of all, kindness. "Do you really care?" the old man asked, his voice breaking as he fought back tears. Johnny simply nodded, his voice filled with sincerity. "I do, because I know how it feels to need someone. And I know that even in our darkest moments, we don't have to face it alone." For the first time in years, the old man felt seen. His life, which had been reduced to surviving on the streets, was momentarily lifted by the warmth of Johnny's gesture. As they sat together, sharing a quiet bond of understanding, the noise of the city seemed to fade. For a brief moment, it was just two people, one giving, the other receiving, and the world outside didn't matter. When Johnny stood to leave, he turned to the old man one last time. "You matter. Don't forget that," he said, his voice full of quiet strength. The old man, his heart full of gratitude, nodded slowly. The words weren't just an empty sentiment. They were a reminder that even in a world filled with pain, kindness still had the power to change lives. As Johnny disappeared into the bustling crowd, the old man sat up straighter, a slight smile tugging at his lips. He may have been alone in the physical sense, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel invisible. He felt human again. And that small moment of humanity, that simple act of kindness, was enough to make him believe, just for today, that things could get better. Later that evening, as Johnny sat in his car, the day's events replayed in his mind. The encounter with the old man, the raw emotion, the shared connection, it had reminded him of something important. We all carry pain, Johnny thought, but it's the kindness we show each other that helps us heal. He'd given the old man more than just a meal. He had given him the most precious gift of all, a reminder that humanity still existed, even in the harshest of circumstances. As Johnny drove off into the fading light, a single thought echoed in his mind. It was never about the money or the food, Johnny thought, his fingers gently tapping the steering wheel. It was about being seen. Sometimes that's all we need, to know someone truly cares. The soft hum of the engine filled the silence as he stared out the window, watching the city blur past him. The encounter with the old man, a stranger who had lived a life of abandonment and hardship, weighed heavily on his heart. "I've been caught in the storm of my own demons," Johnny mused, his grip tightening on the wheel as he remembered his own battles. "But I know now that light shines brighter when shared. Maybe we all just need a hand to pull us out of the dark sometimes." His mind drifted back to the look in the old man's eyes, the moment of disbelief when he realized someone, anyone, would notice him, that someone could care, even just for a moment. What if everyone took a moment, just one, to see someone else? Johnny wondered aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe that's how we heal, not just through grand gestures, but through the everyday kindnesses we show one another. Johnny glanced in the rearview mirror, the flashing lights of the city behind him seeming so far away now. His life, the constant whirlwind of fame and attention, suddenly felt distant, less important in comparison to the connection he had just shared with a stranger. "I'll be back to the glitz and glam tomorrow," Johnny thought, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "But tonight, I feel something else, something real, a connection not to the world that sees me as a face on a screen, but to the world that needs love and compassion." As Johnny turned into his driveway, the familiar sights of his home greeted him, but there was a peace in his heart he hadn't expected. The world would keep turning, the noise would return, but for now he had something more important to hold on to, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always room for kindness. "Sometimes," Johnny whispered to himself, the words like a quiet promise, "the smallest acts of kindness are the ones that last the longest."